Chapter 709. Wu Ming looked in the direction Nitocris was pointing at. It was the end of the corridor, and there was a simple earthen yellow stone door carved with decorative patterns. Without a doubt, behind the stone door was where Ramses II was. "I'll take my leave first, sir. Lord Osmanthus is waiting for you inside," Nitocris said and turned to leave. "Wait a minute, Pharaoh Nitocris." Wu Ming stopped her. "Is there anything else you need?" Nitocris looked at Wu Ming, who had stopped her with a puzzled expression. "Didn't Ramses II tell you my name? Why do you keep addressing me as sir?" After all, if it was Ramses II, he should be aware of Wu Ming's identity. And as someone sent by Ramses II to entertain Wu Ming, Nitocris should know Wu Ming's name. That would be too rude to Wu Ming, who was a guest. "No, Lord Osmanthus told me your name, the most mysterious legendary knight under King Arthur's command. Britain's silver dragon, Vilo-Siranthod." This time, it was Wu Ming who was stunned. Since Nitocris knew his identity, why didn't she address Wu Ming by that name, but instead used the vague title of Sir to address Wu Ming? Although this body is the body of a sinner who has yet to enter the kingdom of eternity, this body also has some abilities because of the name of Pharaoh, Nitocris explained. "Although Lord Osmanthus told me that your identity is a Knight of the Round Table, this body can still see that your true identity is not so." Although Nitocris' identity as a pharaoh was half pushed, she still obtained divinity, the son of the sky god Horus, and his incarnation. Immediately after, Nitocris suddenly became respectful. "Just like Lord Osmanthus is the incarnation of the sun god Ra. Although I can't see your true body clearly, I still see some clues. You are a great person." Immediately after, Nitocris revealed an embarrassed look. "Because I can see that your identity is not as simple as a Knight of the Round Table, I can no longer address you as Vilo-Siranthod. Similarly, because I can't see what your true identity is, I can only address you as a vague title like Sir." After Nitocris' explanation, Wu Ming felt relieved. Although Nitocris' identity as a pharaoh wasn't as legitimate as other pharaoh, she was still the incarnation of a god. It was normal for her to be able to see some clues about Wu Ming's identity. But in this case, didn't Ramses II was a pharaoh was a Pharaoh Siranthod? Pharaoh Siranthod, but he didn't tell Pharaoh Saranthan as Saranthos. However, Ramses II didn't tell her about the origin dragon. Although she didn't know why, it wasn't important anymore. Because Wu Ming was about to meet Ramses II, it was better to ask all his questions face to face. As for Nitocris, it's a little perfunctory to call a refugee without a name. "Just call me Vilo. After all, I'm just a knight now," Wu Ming replied. Since Ramses II didn't tell his subordinates about Wu Ming's secret, then Wu Ming wouldn't take his place. "Yes, Sir Vilo. Since I've brought you here, I'll take my leave now," Nitocris said before she walked into the dimly lit corridor behind her. "Meeting is fate. Let me give you an evaluation." Upon hearing Wu Ming's words, Nitocris stopped in her tracks again. Not entering the kingdom of eternity doesn't mean that you're unqualified as a pharaoh. In my opinion, even a pharaoh who was raised to the position of a pharaoh like a puppet is able to choose death to avenge his family. Such a pharaoh isn't inferior to other pharaoh. Wu Ming's words shocked Nitocris. As for why, it was because no one had said such words to her before. "I inform you as a great person. You should be proud of it." "Thank you for your praise, Sir Vilo. Master of Chaldea, with the help of someone like you, I don't have to worry about their safety." Nitocris didn't turn around and spoke with her back facing Wu Ming. Saying this, Nitocris left. This time, Wu Ming didn't stop Nitocris and let her leave on her own. "I see. Great stupidity appears to be wisdom." Wu Ming nodded. As expected, a pharaoh, even if she was a puppet, wasn't someone without intelligence. Nitocris might have guessed that Wu Ming came to obtain the Holy Grail for Gadotsi. Although Wu Ming prepared to obtain the Holy Grail in order to ruin Artoria's plan, Wu Ming's goal of obtaining the Holy Grail was ultimately for Gadotsi, or rather, Chaldea. But the reason wasn't important anymore because Wu Ming was about to face the Sun King, Ramses II, who held the Holy Grail. Without any hesitation, Wu Ming walked up to the stone door and used a little force. The stone door seemed to have some kind of mechanism, and Wu Ming pushed it open with a little force. The first thing that entered Wu Ming's eyes was the dazzling sunlight. Wu Ming squinted his eyes subconsciously. After that, An unusually spacious hall appeared in front of Wuming. Unlike the gloomy corridor that Wuming passed by before, this hall seemed to be under the sun. The hall was very spacious, and from the outside, it was impossible to tell that there was such a spacious space inside the hall. The walls around the hall were also engraved with murals, and the surrounding walls extended diagonally with the centermost point as the center. It felt like a pyramid. However, in this spacious space, it didn't seem like a pyramid at all. Only people with eyesight, like Wuming, could see it. At the very least, ordinary people like Gudatsi wouldn't be able to see it. Several thick load-bearing pillars were arranged in a regular pattern in the hall. Sunlight that appeared out of nowhere sprinkled on the walls and floor, dyeing them with a layer of golden color. In the centermost position, there was a high platform that looked like a small pyramid. Step-like steps were located in front of this high platform. This was undoubtedly the throne. And at the highest point of this throne sat a dark-skinned man in gorgeous ancient Egyptian clothing. This should be Sun King Ramses II. Chapter 7:10. The one sitting on the throne was indeed Ramses II. At this moment, Ramses II's eyes were closed as if he had fallen asleep from the long wait. After Wu Ming stared at the other party for a few seconds, Ramses II opened his eyes as if his heart was connected. Ramses II stared at Wu Ming's crimson eyes with his golden eyes and slowly opened his mouth. "You're finally here, Origin Dragon." Ramses II's words made Wu Ming certain that the other party indeed knew his identity. "Take a seat." After Ramses II finished speaking, a cloud of sand suddenly appeared on the throne to his side. The sand condensed and turned into a stone seat. Wu Ming's identity was qualified to sit on the same level as him, and Ramses II's personality wasn't as bad as Gilgamesh's, so he prepared a seat for Wu Ming. Wu Ming didn't argue and walked up the stairs to the throne. The reason why he didn't use a portal to go up directly was mainly to give the other party face. To be treated as an equal by such a king. Even Wu Ming knew when to advance and when to retreat. Wu Ming walked up the throne unhurriedly and sat down on the seat that Ramses II had prepared for him. Then, Wu Ming's body surged with magic power and blue flames burned, covering Wu Ming's armor. Wu Ming waved his hand and the flames dissipated. Wu Ming, who was originally wearing armor, was now wearing a ceremonial robe that Wu Ming had worn in Camelot. The ceremonial robe was something that Wu Ming had casually condensed with magic power, so he changed into a ceremonial robe. After all, it was rude to wear armor during a meeting. "Nice to meet you, Sun King Ramses II. I'm glad to be able to have a peaceful conversation with you." Wu Ming took the initiative to greet him. "I'm also quite interested in your existence. Although you're still young, I can't see through your strength. As expected of the Great One." Ramses II maintained the posture of holding his head with one hand and commented on Wu Ming. "I'm quite surprised by you. In my opinion, an existence like you should have the same personality as Gilgamesh." Wu Ming meant that Ramses II's attitude toward him was a little too good. "As a pharaoh, the king of kings, I'm naturally arrogant, but my arrogance doesn't mean I'm extremely conceited. I'm different from the Golden King," Ramses II said while still holding his head with one hand. It seemed that Ramses II still knew Gilgamesh. "Then, why don't you tell Pharaoh Nitornis about my true identity? As a pharaoh, the child of the sky god is still too immature. And I don't need to say more about this. She has already seen some clues." Although Ramses II's words were reasonable, Wu Ming felt that he was actually in a good mood and didn't tell Nitornis about Wu Ming's true identity. It was probably time to change the topic. "Let's cut to the chase. Dragon of Origin, you came to my territory pretending to be a Lion King knight. What business do you have?" Ramses II's eyes were arrogant and his voice was calm. "There's no such thing as pretending. This body's spiritual base is King Arthur's knight. It's just that I tampered with it a little so that I can use the power of my true body." After all, Wu Ming thought that it would be a little difficult for him to deal with this singularity where the spiritual base of Vilo-Sarinthid was severely damaged. Although it wasn't to the extent that he was lacking in strength, but if he really needed to fight, Wu Ming would have a hard time. After all, in many cases, violence was the best way to solve a problem. Just like how Wu Ming persuaded Tristan to surrender with violence. "Oh, that means you didn't come to me as a Lion King knight?" Ramses II squinted his eyes and smiled. "If that's the case, you should be here for the Master of Chaldea." With just one sentence and the current situation, he was able to analyze the camp that Wu Ming belonged to. This made Wu Ming very impressed. As expected of one of the greatest pharaohs of ancient Egypt, his wisdom was also extraordinary. Indeed, for your action of letting Chaldea go, I would like to express my gratitude. There's no need for that. It's just that I'm slightly interested in the master of Chaldea. Ramses II rejected Wu Ming's gratitude. In response, Wu Ming smiled. If it's a kind interest, that's fine, but, as Wu Ming spoke, magic surged around him. If it's a malicious interest, I won't sit back and watch your interest hurt Tachika, Sun King. Wu Ming's expression instantly became serious as he stared at Ramses II, as if he would attack at any moment. Humph. Dragon of origin, are you threatening me? Ramses II wasn't a mild-tempered person after all. In the face of Wu Ming's threatening words, he was naturally a little angry. I wouldn't dare. Tachika is like family to me. I think protecting family is something that everyone, even the king, wants to do no matter what. Although Wu Ming's words were reasonable, but Wu Ming's words reminded Ramses II of his beloved wife and the eldest son that she gave birth to but died of illness. Humph. I don't want to treat the Dragon of Origin as a glib talker. You're here for the Holy Grail, right? Ramses II changed the topic again. That's right. Wu Ming nodded without hesitation. Seeing that Ramses II was speechless and changed the topic after being targeted by his words, Wu Ming also changed the topic. The Holy Grail is needed to repair the singularity. As long as the Holy Grail doesn't exist in the singularity, the error will slowly be repaired. However, Ramses II scoffed at Wu Ming's words. Humph. You were King Arthur's knight. Although I don't know what the White King wants to do, I know one thing. After the Holy Grail is recovered, the singularity will never be properly repaired. Wu Ming frowned slightly. Ramses II didn't seem to be lying. Could it be that Artoria has some other plans? You should have seen the changes in this singularity. Even if the Holy Grail is recovered, before the singularity is completely repaired, if the Lion King wants to do something, the other party can do it. Ramses II's words made sense. Because the singularity collapsed more severely, after the Holy Grail was recovered, the self-repair of this singularity wasn't as fast as other singularities. If Artoria had any plans at that time, then this singularity was indeed likely to have an accident. To be more serious, this singularity was likely to directly. There's no doubt that it will collapse. Chapter 7:11. Ramses II expressed his thoughts on behalf of Wu Ming. Even if I don't do anything, the Lion King alone can definitely do it. Ramses II held his face with one hand and showed a happy smile. Don't think that Ramses II was amiable in front of Wu Ming. It would be a big mistake to think that he was not that strong. If Wu Ming only appeared as a Vilo-Saranth, he would have no problem protecting himself when facing Ramses II. But if that was the case, Wu Ming would definitely not be able to defeat Ramses II. In mythology, Vilo-Saranth was actually a suspected dragon-type knight who held another holy sword. Wu Ming was the strongest, but he could only reach the level of the current Lion King, and the current Lion King could only fight to a draw with Ramses II. Of course, there was a reason for this tie. Ramses II wasn't interested in the battle with the Lion King, and the Lion King chose to find another way because he couldn't take down Ramses II in a short time. This led to the current situation of a tie. This gave people the feeling that Ramses II had the upper hand. After all, the Lion King was the first to propose a peace treaty. However, to be able to be in a state of polar opposites with Ramses II was enough to show the Lion King's strength. Therefore, no one would gossip about it. Even if Ramses II was serious, he might not be able to gain the upper hand. That was the goddess Artoria. It would not be a problem to call her the goddess Lungaminyad. Moreover, Artoria had anchors on both sides of the world. At the same time, it was her noble phantasm, the holy spear Lungaminyad. Ramses II was very strong. This was true. His noble phantasm was the temple complex here. In the temple, Ramses II was invincible. What's more, he had moved the other buildings in the desert here. Needless to say, he was very powerful. However, in terms of attack, he was slightly weaker than Artoria. After all, Artoria's noble phantasm was the holy spear, which was an offensive noble phantasm. Although Ramses II's great temple was also offensive, it was nothing compared to the holy spear Lungaminiad. As the king of kings, Ramses II was indeed very arrogant. However, his arrogance didn't mean that he was a fool. He was aware that his attack was weaker than his opponents. However, thou need not worry that I will add fuel to the fire at that time. Although I act according to my mood, I will not do something like destroying mankind. These words changed Wu Ming's impression of Ramses II. No matter how willful he was, his duty to protect others would never change. It did not mean that the person who possessed the Holy Grail created by the demon god king was the source of the disturbance to the singularity. After all, if I don't have my people, who should I lead? Well, Wu Ming's impression of Ramses II returned. He was a willful king just like Gilgamesh. Before I came here, I went to the holy city and talked to my king. I don't think she is lying to me. Ignoring Ramses II's bad personality, Wu Ming expressed his personal opinion. So, I don't think she will destroy the singularity like you said. Artoria's plan was to preserve the purity of mankind. Whether it was Artoria, Gawain, or Guinevere, they all said so. Wu Ming did not think that they would work together to deceive him. And if the truth was as they said, there was no way to destroy the singularity. However, Ramses II had no reason to lie. No, it should be said that a person like Ramses II would not lie. Then, could it be that... Wu Ming suddenly thought of something. Could it be that Artoria didn't tell anyone or Wu Ming the real plan and was prepared to rely on her own strength to carry out the plan? And the implementation of Artoria's plan would lead to the destruction of the singularity as Ramses II said. If that was the case, why would Artoria lie to Wu Ming? This was also easy to explain. Artoria's body had matured, and because she had held the Holy Spear for a long time, she had been deified by the Holy Spear Maiden. It was inevitable that her inner thoughts would change. Therefore, even if it was Wu Ming who was the closest to her, it was a thing of the past. Thou art a smart man. I have made it so clear, so thou shouldst understand. Ramses II held his crooked head with one hand and tapped his throne with the other. Indeed, Ramses II had made it clear. You're right. However, all of this is just a guess. Wu Ming looked at Ramses II without the slightest hesitation and wasn't affected by his words. Ha ha ha. Ramses II burst into laughter. Not bad at all. As expected of the dragon of origin. My conversation with thee was subpar, but I am quite satisfied. After laughing, Ramses II nodded in satisfaction. He didn't know if it was Wu Ming's illusion, but Wu Ming felt that there was something wrong with Ramses II's hand holding his head. Wu Ming shook his head and stopped thinking about these messy and unrealistic things. Then, can you give me the Holy Grail? Wu Ming went straight to the point. Fortunately, Gudatzi and the others weren't around. Otherwise, they would be shocked. After all, how could they give something to someone so directly? However, a golden light flashed before Wu Ming's eyes and he caught it subconsciously. Wu Ming took a closer look. It was a golden cup. The Holy Grail. This thing isn't of much use to me. If thou wants it, then take it. Thank you. Wu Ming thanked him and put away the Holy Grail. With this, Wu Ming finally understood. Ramses II had never treated anyone as an enemy. As the pharaoh who ruled over thousands of people, the king of gods, and the king of kings, other than himself and the people he acknowledged, everyone else was equal. There was no such thing as enemies or non-enemies. Therefore, Ramses II fought with the Lion King calmly. After the other party proposed a peace treaty, Ramses II agreed without hesitation. And Gudatzi was able to leave the desert so smoothly because of Ramses II's indulgence. It was also because of this that he gave the Holy Grail to Wu Ming. What a willful king. Suddenly, there was an explosion. Boom! Chapter 7:12. Boom! The sound of explosions continued to come from the outside. Even the hall where Ramses II and Wu Ming were in shook faintly. Ramses II chuckled and looked at Wu Ming. That's thy kin. The son of the sky seems to be fighting with the other party. After all, this was Ramses II's territory and the temple complex. He had great control over the surroundings, so even if he was in the temple, he could still see what was happening outside. Hearing Ramses II's words, Wu Ming thought to himself, as expected. Even if Ramses II didn't say anything, Wu Ming knew that it was definitely Jillian who was causing trouble. Although the magic link wasn't connected, Wu Ming didn't mean that Wu Ming wasn't in the same state as his servant. Wu Ming felt it very clearly. Jillian's magic power was being consumed, and she was most likely releasing Sky Strike. I'm a fool to expect her to be honest alone. Wu Ming sighed and shook his head helplessly. I owe you a favor, Wu Ming said and stood up. Giving him the Holy Grail for free was already a great favor. In addition, Wu Ming's people were causing trouble outside. In any case, Wu Ming was in the wrong. As Wu Ming stood up, a black-purple ripple appeared beside Wu Ming. Oh, spatial magic, Ramses II said with interest. It's not spatial magic, just a little trick. Wu Ming shook his head. Then I'll take my leave first, Wu Ming said and walked into the portal. The black-purple ripple swallowed Wu Ming's body and then disappeared. Ramses II looked at the place where Wu Ming disappeared and closed his eyes. Where's the root dragon? Ramses II said with a chuckle. It was unknown whether it was mockery or admiration. Outside the temple, a black-purple portal appeared in the sky and Wu Ming's figure appeared. As long as Wu Ming had been to a place without restrictions, he could use the portal to quickly move. Because of the advance notice, Ramses II temporarily opened up space authority to Wu Ming, so Wu Ming could teleport in Ramses II's temple. Using telekinesis to float in the air, Wu Ming looked down. Jillian held a purple scythe condensed from magic and slaughtered a large group of Sphinx. Jillian's scythe was like a wheat harvester, harvesting the Sphinx, and releasing energy pillars from time to time, which caused the earth rumbled. The energy pillars were simply magic power released by Jillian in the form of a pillar. There was no fancy stuff. But because of the purity of the energy pillars and Jillian's reckless use, Wu Ming felt the tremors and Jillian's wanton release of magic power. Ha 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 ha. Come and kill. Ha 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 ha. Jillian laughed maniacally as she killed, as if she had entered a state of madness. The Sphinx seemed to be endless. They kept surging out of the sand and charged at Jillian. However, even if Jillian was in a frenzy, her nature as a weapon would not change. Using her wings and her petite body, Gopril jumped up and down among the Sphinxes. These 3-meter-tall Sphinxes were unable to catch Gopril. They couldn't even catch a single feather of hers. Instead, the Sphinx were cut into several pieces by Jillian's scythe and turned into pure magic power that dissipated. In addition to the frenzied Jillian and the resolute Sphinx, Wu Ming also saw another figure behind the Sphinx army. Pharaoh Nitornus. The Sphinx army seemed to have been summoned by Nitornus. However, Nitornus would cast a few magic spells on Jillian from time to time. There were also attacks like Mummy's Claw and Sacred Beetle's Charge. But these attacks and magic spells had no effect on Jillian without exception. Basically, these attacks were either deflected by Jillian's scythe or dodged by Jillian agilely. After that, Nitornus seemed to have given up and focused on summoning the Sphinx army. Sacred Beetles, Mummies, Sphinx army. Wu Ming could not help but ridicule Nitornus. Nitornus was really like a summoner. Like a summoner, Nitornus held the staff in her hand and constantly released magic power on the ground. It seemed that these endless Sphinx were summoned by Nitornus. If Ramses II authorized it, then it would be easy for Nitornus to summon the endless Sphinx army in the desert where the shrine was located. Giliel, on the other hand, seemed to have been dominated by madness. She didn't care about Nitocris, the summoner at the back at all. Instead, she threw herself into the endless swarm of Sphinxes. However, in Wu Ming's opinion, it was very likely that Gopril didn't attack Nitocris because she was in a berserk state. After all, if Nitornus was defeated, the Sphinx army was likely to disappear. In that case, Jillian would not be able to enjoy the fun of killing. But even if Gopril didn't attack Nitocris, she wouldn't be able to enjoy the fun of the battle anymore. Why? Because Wu Ming was here. Calm down, Jillian. Wu Ming's voice came into Jillian's ears, which made Jillian stunned. Since Jillian and Wu Ming signed a dependent contract, Jillian became Wu Ming's dependent. Although Wu Ming could make those who surrendered to him and became his dependent completely obey him, it was a bit cruel for those who volunteered to become Wu Ming's dependent. Volunteering represented trust in Wu Ming, and if Wu Ming did that, he would fail to live up to the trust of his dependents, so Wu Ming would never do that. However, authority was authority. As mentioned before, the dependent authority could make Wu Ming's dependents subtly change their minds, making them loyal to Wu Ming from the bottom of their hearts. Therefore, even if Wu Ming did not use coercive orders, Wu Ming's dependents would have a feeling of being unable to disobey Wu Ming's orders. Jillian was like that now. Because she heard Wu Ming's words, she subconsciously paused for a moment. It was precisely because of this critical pause that the Sphinx army swarmed in and buried Jillian. Chapter 7:13. Sky Strike. Suddenly, a voice that sounded like an incantation came from the Sphinx army that had buried Jillian. In an instant, the Sphinx army stopped moving as if someone had pressed the pause button. Boom! Immediately after, a violent explosion erupted at the location where Gopril was engulfed by the Sphinx army. What? Nitoris, who was at the back of the Sphinx army, was shocked when she saw this. She did not expect the hot-tempered guy to have such a trick up his sleeve. Blue mana exploded in a semicircle and spread out in all directions at an extremely fast speed. The earth seemed to have been plowed to one side, and the blue magic explosion directly annihilated a layer of earth. The explosion destroyed the earth, causing the earth to shake even more violently than the earthquake that Wu Ming felt just now. At the edge of the explosion, soil splashed everywhere, and in the next second, the splashed soil was absorbed by the continuous explosion, following in the footsteps of the former. All the Sphinx that were affected by the blue magic explosion were destroyed without exception. Boom, 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 boom. Every Sphinx that was caught in the blast exploded in loud explosions. The Sphinx army was dying at a speed visible to the naked eye. Even Nitoris was a little flustered by this sudden event. Wah! Wah! Affected by the earthquake, Nitoris couldn't help but take 2 steps back. She propped her scepter on the ground. Naturally, the summoning of the Sphinx army was interrupted. Meanwhile, Giliel's Sky Strike had wiped out the Sphinx army. As Gopril was distracted by Wu Ming's words, the Sphinx army swarmed forward, which made Gopril's Sky Strike more convenient. All in all, it was a great victory for Jillian. Niticles came to her senses and looked in Jillian's direction with resentment. Giliel's eyes were red as she smiled cruelly at Nitocris. Her pure white wings, which hadn't been stained by the battle, suddenly flapped and Giliel charged towards Nitocris. Damn it! Nitoris gnashed her teeth, but there was nothing she could do. After witnessing Jillian's strength, she was fully aware that she couldn't last more than 1 round against her. In Nitoris's eyes, Jillian was a weapon born for battle. She was just an unqualified pharaoh, so how could she possibly defeat such a monster? That's all I can do. Nitoris stood up with her scepter and made up her mind. She was ready to use her precious artifact. Although Giliel would most likely die if she used that noble artifact, if she didn't use it, the next one to die would most likely be her, Niticles. After all, to deal with such a monster, if she did not use her relic, she would not even have a way to self-destruct. It's about time to stop, Jillian. At this moment, Wu Ming's voice resounded through the sky. As if afraid that Jillian couldn't hear him, Wu Ming's voice wasn't soft this time. It wasn't soft to the point that Nitoris heard it. Lord Villo? Nitoris was shocked. It was reasonable for Nitoris to be shocked. After all, Nitoris was going to kill Jillian, and Jillian was Wu Ming's subordinate. This was no less than killing her knight in front of the Lion King. How could Niticles not be startled by this? Of course, if she was judged to have failed, it could only be considered an attempt. After all, Nitoris had yet to make her move. Although Nitoris didn't make her move, Jillian didn't stop moving. Although Jillian heard Wu Ming's words and lowered her speed subconsciously, she didn't stop completely. Jillian still flew toward Nitoris. It was apparent that Jillian was affected by the berserk state. Wu Ming, who had been watching from the side for a while, naturally noticed it. That was why he didn't intend to use words to stop Jillian. Clank! The sound of chains slithering entered Jillian's ears. Several golden ripples appeared behind Wu Ming and the chains within the ripples shot toward Jillian. Jillian didn't turn around to observe. She was confident that she could dodge the chains by relying on her voice and instincts. But how could Wu Ming let her do as she wished? Boom! Jillian came to a halt as though she had crashed into an invisible wall. At the same time, she let out a muffled groan. Jillian's scarlet eyes that gradually lost irrationality revealed a trace of doubt. Feeling the strange tightness in her body, she looked at her body. Silver whitish chains appeared in the purplish-black ripples around Jillian out of nowhere. This was the combination of Wu Ming's teleportation gate and pseudo-sky lock. As it was easy to use, Wu Ming had used it more than once. The pseudo-sky lock bound Jillian's limbs, body, and wings. Not only that, but the chains also extended and wrapped around Jillian like living creatures. Gradually, Gopril was entangled by the pseudo-heavenly shackles until she was like a mummy. Her exposed skin was almost completely entangled by the chains and only a small part of her skin was revealed. Jillian subconsciously released her magical powers to break free from the chains. In the end, she discovered that only the exposed skin released a trace of magical powers. The magical powers that she released basically disappeared like air in a leaking balloon when they came into contact with the chains. My magical powers were absorbed? This was Jillian's last thought before she lost her vision. Shortly after, her head was wrapped by the snake-like chains. At the same time, she closed her eyes and fell into a coma. At that moment, Jillian's entire body, including her head, was wrapped in layers of silver-whitish chains. At that moment, Jillian, who had lost an absolute part of her rationality, was subdued. On the other side, at Wu Ming's location, Wu Ming's hands were wrapped in a large number of chains. The chains that extended from Wu Ming's arms entered the purplish-black ripples of the teleportation gate. Wu Ming didn't move at all. He only created some pseudo-skylocks and used the teleportation gate to launch a surprise attack on Jillian. As for Jillian's magical powers being absorbed, that wasn't right. Jillian's magical powers should have been annihilated. Chapter 7:14. As mentioned before, Wu Ming cheated by bringing his noble phantasm, 12 avatars of authority, to this spiritual base. However, the ability of these 12 avatars could only be used once in this spiritual base. Once one of them was used, there would be one less avatar, just like a consumable item. Wu Ming summoned Sky Wing and Abendheim using the 8th avatar, so Wu Ming only had 11 avatars left. When Wu Ming made the pseudo-heavenly lock, he deliberately used one of the remaining 11 avatars. Wu Ming added the 5th avatar's annihilation characteristic to the pseudo-heavenly lock, which made the person bound by the pseudo-heavenly lock be annihilated. Of course, Wu Ming could choose what to annihilate the other party, whether it was the body or the magical power. It was up to Wu Ming's precise control. Wu Ming chose the magical power released from the surface of Giliel's skin to annihilate, so Giliel's body was not damaged. However, this was not without drawbacks. The pseudo-heavenly lock with the annihilation characteristic could no longer retain the ability to restrain divinity. Originally, Wu Ming could use high-grade items to create the pseudo-heavenly lock with the effect of restraining divinity, but when the avatar of annihilation was added to the process of creating the pseudo-heavenly lock, the characteristics of the pseudo-heavenly lock were annihilated. Or it should be said that the ability of annihilation annihilated the characteristics of the pseudo-heavenly lock. And because there was only one characteristic of the heavenly lock, that was, the higher the divinity of the person bound, the tighter the heavenly lock would bind. Therefore, after the annihilation characteristic was added, the restraining divinity characteristic disappeared. But that didn't matter. After all, the pseudo-heavenly lock could be recreated. On the contrary, the chains with the annihilation characteristic could only be found by chance. After all, Wu Ming's annihilation avatar had been used, and there were only 10 avatars left. Although the 12 incarnations had become a consumable item, Razin still had to use it. After all, if he didn't use it, why would Wu Ming bother to bring the 12 incarnations here? Controlling the pseudo-sky lock, or rather the annihilation lock, Wu Ming sent the unconscious Jillian into the portal. Jillian's unconsciousness wasn't caused by Wu Ming's annihilation lock, it was only because Jillian had overused her mana. Generally speaking, excessive mana consumption would only cause one to become extremely weak. Worse, one might not even be able to maintain a physical body and be forced to enter a spiritual state. The main reason why Jillian was unconscious was that Wu Ming had forcefully stopped her while she was flying at high speed. When she released her mana, it was instantly annihilated, causing her to fall unconscious. While Gopril was unconscious, Wu Ming had already connected to Gopril's spirit base and started providing her with magic power. Although Wu Ming had consumed a lot of mana when summoning the Sky Wing species and Abante, Wu Ming could still provide for a servant. After Gopril was completely engulfed by the black-purple teleportation gate, Silent Cry landed. "I'm sorry, Pharaoh Nitornis, I didn't manage my subordinates well." Wu Ming, who came in front of Nitornis, said to Nitornis. In any case, it could be seen from Jillian's final impact that she had the desire to kill Nitornis. Wuming also saw that Nitornis was ready to release her noble phantasm. If Wuming didn't stop her, either one of Jillian and Nitornis would leave, or both of them would leave together. After all, it was very likely that when Nitornis released her noble phantasm to take Jillian away, Jillian also took the opportunity to take Nitornis away. In short, they would die together. If that happened, there would be a rift between him and Ramses II. If he came to the other party's territory and his subordinates died together with the other party's subordinates, regardless of whether Wuming had malicious intentions or not, he would become enemies with the other party. Wuming would think of the worst-case scenario. After all, there was no harm in preparing for a rainy day. But fortunately, all of this was stopped by Wuming. "You're exaggerating, Sir Villo." Nitornis stood firm and shook her head. "By the way, do you know what's going on? Why did Jillian fall into such a state of madness?" Although Wuming knew that Jillian wasn't honest, Jillian shouldn't have fallen into madness so easily. Although it was also possible that Jillian wanted to play around and ended up screwing up. "I don't really understand." Nitornis shook her head. Immediately after, Nitornis told Wuming everything she knew. After Nitornis sent Wuming to the main hall where Ramses II was, she left the main hall and went outside. Then, she saw Jillian teasing the Sphinx group responsible for guarding the place. Nitornis was dissatisfied and stopped Jillian with words. In the end, Jillian stopped teasing the Sphinx group and started chatting with Nitornis. Although Nitocris was rather surprised, after exchanging names with Gopril and attempting to chat with her, she found that Gopril wasn't a bad person. Thus, the two of them began to converse. Although they might develop into enemies because of their respective masters, neither Nitornis nor Jillian was worried. Once they became enemies, they would go all out. Be it Nitornis's loyalty to Ramses II or Jillian's loyalty to Wuming, they wouldn't let the two of them stop just because they had a good chat. Although it sounded cruel, that was the truth. Afterward, when they talked about the sandstorm they encountered when they first entered the desert, Nitornis said, "I did it." After that, Giliel smiled and began her attack on Nitocris. It had to be said that Nitornis was still too naive. Jillian was clearly tricking her. Jillian was rather concerned about the unkillable sandstorm. Although the Sky Wings were not as vengeful as the forest goblins, Jillian was not the kind of person who wouldn't get back at someone for smashing her place. Jillian attacked Nitornis, but Nitornis found it rather baffling because she didn't know what she had said wrong. However, since the other party had attacked, Nitornis would not passively take the beating. As a pharaoh, Nitornis naturally used magic and summoned servants to attack, but as mentioned before, whether it was the scarabs, mummies or magic, they all had little effect on Jillian. Only a large creature like the Sphinx could slightly restrain Jillian. Thus, Nitornis began to summon the Sphinx frantically. Wuming knew what happened next. In other words, Jillian gradually lost her rationality in the battle. Chapter 7:15. Although she was furious that Nitocris had used the sandstorm to toy with her, she was in no hurry to kill Nitocris because she wanted to play with her. Instead, she fought with Nitocris's summoned creatures in an attempt to find joy in the slaughter. Although Nitocris was a pharaoh and had a powerful noble phantasm, if Gypril assassinated her or launched a surprise attack, Nitocris might not be able to use her noble phantasm. After all, Gypril's physical attributes were very powerful. Based on the servant panel, it was the attributes of a top-notch servant. Therefore, Gypril, who did not directly kill Nitocris, actually wanted to play with Nitocris to avenge the shame of the sandstorm. As a result, when Gypril fought with the Sphinx summoned by Nitocris, Gypril was gradually affected by Berserk to the extent that she did not even listen to Wuming's words. Although it was not clear whether this was the case or not, Wuming felt that his judgment was correct. In short, in fact, Gypril reaped what she sowed. Wuming's tone was somewhat helpless, but things had already happened, and Wuming could only smile. "That, Sir Villo." Nitocris looked like she wanted to say something but hesitated. "If you have something to say, just say it. After all, this time we are in the wrong." Wuming calmly signaled Nitocris to speak her mind. "Yes." Nitocris nodded. "Although I am not a member of your camp, if possible, please do not punish Miss Gypril." "If I understand correctly, are you pleading for her?" Wu-ming glanced at Niticles in surprise. Niticles' pleading for Gypril was beyond Wu-ming's expectations. That's right. Miss Jillian and I hit it off quite well. I feel quite happy chatting with her. Although I don't know why Miss Jillian would suddenly attack me, I think it should be because Miss Jillian was affected by the berserk skill. This made Wu-ming even more astonished. Even now, Nitocris still couldn't tell that Jillian was only pretending to chat with her. Her true goal was to get information out of her. Can I ask why? Wu-ming asked. Niticles hesitated. Seeing such a Niticles, Wu-ming quickly waved his hand. Of course, if it's inconvenient, you don't have to say it. However, Niticles shook her head. There's nothing inconvenient about it. Then, as if she had made up her mind, Niticles began to explain. Lord Varen, I'm sure you already know that I became a pharaoh because I was pushed to that position by someone else. To put it simply, I'm just a puppet. Niticles' eyes wavered as if she was recalling the events of her life. But even so, I'm prepared to become a pharaoh, the son of God, the king of gods. But the price is that I don't have any close friends. As she spoke, Nitornis's eyes dimmed. After being hastily pushed to the position of pharaoh, her original friends were probably gradually estranged from her because of the difference between human and God. But I still have my brother. I can chat with him in my free time and relax my tense heart. Just that alone is enough for me. Thinking of her family, Niticle's eyes showed a trace of gentleness. But my only family member, my brother, was branded with a groundless crime. He was murdered by those who pushed me to the position of pharaoh and treated me as a puppet. Niticle's tone carried a trace of grief and indignation. They even deliberately let me know of this news and talked about it in front of me as if they were showing off. Because she was a puppet, a bird in a cage, there was no need to avoid it. Because she was a puppet, a fish in a pond, there was no need to fear it. And because she was a puppet, something in the palm of her hand, there was no need to be vigilant. And the result was, I killed them, said Nitocris, neither sad nor happy. They never thought that I would attack them. I still remember their expressions of despair before they were drowned. Although Nitocris's words were cruel, there was no complacency on her face from her successful revenge. Because it was meaningless. Why was it meaningless? It was because my family member can't be revived. Even if I cut them into pieces, he still can't be revived. Niticles gripped the scepter tightly as if it was going to break. I lost my family member who understood me. I also thought that my actions of murder disqualified me from the position of pharaoh. In the end, I chose to kill myself. Niticles finished speaking. During this time, Wu-ming did not say a word. Since Niticles had spoken to this extent, Wu-ming more or less understood. She was willing to gamble her life for her family because her family understood her. Whether it was because they understood that Niticles was her family or because she was Niticles' family, it was not important. What was important was that she no longer had a close friend. After talking with Gypril for a while, Niticles clearly felt that Gypril could understand her and could become her close friend. This was normal. After all, Niticles had only lived for a short period of time and did not have many close friends. Moreover, after becoming a follower, she had been staying with Ramses II. To Niticles, Ramses II was someone who required respect and loyalty, so they could not become close friends. It could be said that Gypril was the first woman other than Chaldea who could become Niticles's close friend. It was because of this that Niticles would cover up Chaldea's group who had only saved her life. It was also because of this that Niticles did not use a killing move on Gypril from the start. On the other hand, the reason why Gypril didn't attack Nitornis directly was most likely because she had a good impression of her, so she decided to tease her. As for killing Niticles later on, Wu-ming guessed that it was because she was under the influence of berserk. Niticles was prepared to use a noble artifact on Gypril in the end because she was at her wit's end. As mentioned before, if the two of them became enemies, she would definitely not hold back. Niticles could not die yet. At the very least, she could not die in such a sullen manner. At the very least, she had to be loyal to Ramses II. As for whether or not Giliel and Nitocris had taken a liking to each other, they could only wait until Giliel woke up to find out. Although Miss Gypril had the intention to scout for information in the beginning, I could sense that she was indeed very happy during the conversation. That wasn't an act. Nitoris exonerated Gypril. If possible, please don't punish her. After saying that, Nittacles had a pleased look on her face. Wu Ming could only smile helplessly. Don't worry, I won't punish her. Chapter 7:16. I don't have the habit of punishing my subordinates, so even if you say so, I won't punish her. Wu Ming's words made Nitocris calm down. Thank you, Sir Villo. However, Wu Ming was puzzled. I remember you said that you knew that Jillian was chatting with you to get information from you, right? Nitocris nodded with a smile. Sir Villo, you can't be thinking of me as a fool, right? I'm a pharaoh after all. How can I not have some wisdom? After all, when Nitocris drowned those in power who murdered her brother, she used a scheme. In other words, actually, I'm very smart, Wu Ming smiled helplessly. Although he was helpless, Wu Ming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It's about time. My purpose of coming here has been achieved. I'm going to leave now. He got the Holy Grail and didn't fight with Ramses II. Although Jillian had a fight with Nitocris because of her berserk state, nothing happened in the end. So Wu Ming was ready to leave. By the way, Sir Villo, I have something to report. When she heard that Wu Ming was leaving, Nitocris instantly remembered something. What's the matter? Wu Ming looked at Nitocris puzzledly. He shouldn't have any other connection with this place. It's like this, Sir Osmendes captured a knight from the Holy City not long ago. Knight? Wu Ming was stunned at first. Then he thought of something. It can't be Tristan, right? That's a knight who uses a magic bow. Well, it's really Tristan. I have to say that this guy is really unlucky. He was just sent to the desert by Wu Ming to be on standby and gather information, but he was captured not long after. However, if it was really Tristan, why couldn't Wu Ming sense Tristan's location? After all, Wu Ming was currently Tristan's temporary master. Lord Osmendes inadvertently noticed that someone was scouting for information about the terrain nearby, so he directly captured that person and imprisoned him under the pyramid, isolating him. This finally resolved Wu Ming's doubts. It turned out that the barrier had cut off his perception of Tristan. And because Tristan didn't leave, the contract between him and Wu Ming was still intact. That was why Wu Ming didn't realize that Tristan was captured. Lord Osmendes told me to hand him over to you if you want to leave. Hold on. Wu Ming suddenly spoke, interrupting Nitocris. I don't want it anymore. Let him continue to stay under the pyramid. Wu Ming's words stunned Nitocris. Why did he not want it? Thank you Ramses II for taking care of Tristan for me. Remember to thank him for me. I'll take my leave first. What a joke. How could Wu Ming not know what kind of person Tristan was? If he were to return to Artoria, then he would be a great help. It was better to let Tristan stay here. After Wu Ming finished speaking, the dark purple teleportation door opened. Without waiting for Nitocris to react, Wu Ming plunged into it. Then, the dark purple teleportation door closed. Okay. Only then did Nitocris react, and she nodded subconsciously. However, Wu Ming had already left. In the lower level of the pyramid, in the barrier prison, Tristan sat on the stone bed. He looked at his empty hands because his weapons were confiscated and sighed. I'm so sad. On the ground that seemed to have been scorched by flames, the huge floating tree with crystal leaves and a scarlet trunk, a Bonti-heim, floated in the sky. The crystal-like leaves continued to sway with the airflow in the sky, refracting the sunlight in all directions. The huge tree that was like a floating island gave off a harmless feeling under the sunlight. However, under this seemingly peaceful scene, there was a hidden killing intent. The skywing species had entered a standby state. As the existence of the skywing species home, a Bonti's responsibility was not small. Although a Bonti usually looked harmless, that was only because the skywing species were there, so there was no need for it to do anything. Now a Bonti, who shouldered the heavy responsibility of protecting the skywing species, was in a state of high alert. In the sky above a Bonti, a dark purple ripple suddenly appeared. Accompanied by the sound of chains, an angel-like figure fell. It was the unconscious Giliel. When a Bonti saw that the newcomer was someone he knew, some of the tiny tree trunks on his body instantly lengthened and extended, catching Jillian. Immediately after, another dark purple ripple appeared, and Wu Ming's figure appeared in the sky. Seeing that the master it was loyal to had arrived, a Bonti controlled many red branches to extend over. Although it knew that its master could fly, it still had to show some sincerity. Wuming gave Abanti a lot of face, free falling onto the red branches that Abanti had extended over. Standing on Abanti's branches, Wuming arrived on a platform on Abanti's body as if he was taking an elevator. Beside him, Giliel was also placed on the ground by Abanti. The scarlet branches retreated like tentacles, leaving only Wuming and the unconscious Giliel on the platform. Abanti, send Giliel to her room. No one responded to Wuming, and Abanti used its actions to prove its obedience. The platform beneath Gopril seemed to have melted, and Gopril slowly sank down. This was Abanti's ability, so Wuming did not panic. Giliel completely sank into the softened platform. In just a few seconds, Giliel disappeared, and the platform returned to its original state. A very convenient ability, Wuming commented. It had to be said that the Sky Wings had truly made the right choice in choosing to live on Abanti's body. Abanti's mobile, multi-purpose aerial fortress was truly amazing. However, looking at Abanti at his feet, Wuming suddenly remembered something. I seem to have been tricked by Ramses II. It had to be said that it was Ramses II who had launched an attack on Wuming's side first. Wuming had gone this time to get back at him and take the Holy Grail. However, after busying himself for so long, Wuming ended up owing the other party a favor. Although Ramses had launched that attack to determine whether Wuming's faction had the right to exist, it was still the other party who had made the first move. Furthermore, Wuming had been blinded by the Holy Grail. Forget it. It doesn't matter. Wuming shrugged. After all, there was nothing for Ramses II to do. After dealing with the problem of Artoria, he would hand over the Holy Grail to Gadotsi. Let's go take a look at the situation of the Sky Wings. Abanti understood, and the platform under Wuming's feet softened. Wuming's body slowly sank as if he had sunk into a swamp. Chapter 717. To be honest, ever since Wuming became Abanti's master, he had not entered Abanti's body to take a look. Walking in the corridor, Wuming looked around curiously. This isn't any different from other ordinary buildings. Wuming had thought that Abanti's body, which was classified as a living creature, would be closer to the style of a living creature. He did not expect it to be similar to the internal buildings of steel and stone. If there was a difference, it would be that Abanti's building was extremely luxurious. Speaking of which, it seems like the Sky Wings rooms don't have doors. Just as Wuming finished speaking, the corridor changed. The walls of the corridor cracked like the walls of a shoddy house, and doors opened on the smooth walls. In addition, there was a small window on each door. Needless to say, this was definitely done by Abanti for Wuming to make it easier for him to check the condition of the Sky Wings. But I can't just lie on the windows of those doors and look, can I? Wuming said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Hearing Wuming's words, almost all the doors disappeared, except for one door. Since Abanti had left this door, it must have been a signal for Wuming to go in. Without saying anything else, Wuming walked to the only door, pushed it open, and walked in. What greeted him was a monitoring room full of technology. The room was neither big nor small. It was full of modern-style floors and walls, as well as a console with a large number of buttons, keyboards, and control handles. Large, technology-like screens surrounded the room and stuck to the walls. To be honest, Wuming was stunned. Abanti was clearly a moving fortress of magic, but it had created a technology-style control room for Wuming. How could Wuming not be stunned? But this is indeed much more convenient. After coming to his senses, Wuming was no longer surprised that Abanti could create such a room. According to Wuming's understanding, it seemed that the servants would gain modern knowledge when they were summoned. Although Wuming was not sure if the servants summoned in the singularity would gain modern knowledge, seeing how Abanti had so skillfully created such a technology-style room, it probably had already gained modern knowledge. I hope it's that convenient to use, Wuming said as he walked to the console. After all, Wuming was not sure if Abanti could create such a sophisticated instrument just by relying on the modern knowledge given by the summons. The whole room was quite simple. Apart from the big screen and console, there was nothing else. The console, of course, was located in the middle of the room, facing the door. Wuming walked to the back of the control panel and sat on the bright and clean sofa chair. It's quite comfortable. Wuming patted the armrests on both sides of the sofa and nodded in satisfaction. Then, turn the big screen and let me take a look. After Wu Ming finished speaking, a bont began to move. Buzz, one by one, the big screens changed from a dark state to a dazzling blue light. Immediately afterward, the buttons, and joysticks on the console also emitted light. Well, it looks like it. Wu Ming nodded. He didn't expect a Bonti to be able to restore this sense of technology. It was quite smart. Immediately afterward, a virtual screen generated by magic appeared in a folded state on the console in front of Wu Ming. Wu Ming was stunned, but Wu Ming's heart was not calm. Is that it? The big screen on the wall lit up with a blue light and nothing else was displayed. It was as if it had crashed. The device on the console emitted light only to provide a magic outlet for the magic screen, so that the magic screen could be displayed. There was no other use at all. Except for the comfortable chair Wu Ming was sitting in, everything else was just a fake on the outside. I should have thought of it a long time ago. Even if it grants the servant modern knowledge, how can it be possible to tell the servant about the sophisticated computer system? Silent Wonder sighed self-deprecatingly, then smiled helplessly. If the servant was given such a level of knowledge, then the servant summoning system was really terrifying. In other words, a Bonti made this seemingly high-tech monitoring room, but in fact, it was just drawing a ladle according to the gourd. There was no inside of the gourd at all. There was only the ladle outside. In fact, what a Bonti used was still magic, not technology. Forget it. It's fine as long as it can be used. Wu Ming didn't care much. He was just shocked by what Abant, a guy with a trace of natural attribute, did. Without saying anything else, Wu Ming looked at the control console, at the big virtual screen condensed from magic in front of him. Each virtual screen was about 3 meters long and square. The big screen was divided into countless smaller screens, and each screen showed the monitoring situation of the rooms of the Skywings. Because there were so many Skywings, these screens were stacked together. Wu Ming waved his hand, and a Bonti knowingly helped Wu Ming separate the big screens. The virtual screens were spread out in front of Wu Ming, forming a wall. Although it looked a little dazzling, it did indeed report the situation of every Skywing to Wu Ming. Everyone is sleeping soundly. He quickly glanced at the Skywing species on the screen. They were all sleeping soundly. Wu Ming also saw Gopril on the screen. Unlike the other Skywings, she was not floating in the room but lying on her bed. After all, the other Skywings were on standby, while she was unconscious. Although Wu Ming had a way to quickly wake Gopril up, but I'll just let her sleep. In any case, I'll just keep supplying her with magic, and she'll be able to recover. It was just that it would be a little slower. Aside from the Skywings, the big screen also showed the monitoring of the corridor. Looking at the monitoring, Wu Ming suddenly felt that something was wrong with the big screen. He seemed to have seen a black shadow flash across the corridor. He checked the big screen again, trying to find something wrong, but no matter how carefully he looked, he couldn't see anything different. Was it my imagination? Wu Ming frowned. No, that can't be it. It can't be your imagination. Wu Ming had always trusted his sixth sense, and every time he followed it, it was always correct. Wu Ming was sure that something had gotten into a Bonti's body. Furthermore, that black shadow he had just caught gave Wu Ming a sense of danger. A powerful stealth ability, a strange movement technique, and something that even made Wu Ming feel a sense of danger. Combined with this singularity, Wu Ming could only think of one person. First Hassan. Wu Ming had just finished speaking when he saw a sword flash coming at him. Chapter 7:18. Wu Ming instinctively tried to dodge, only to realize that it was futile. I can't dodge it. Wu Ming was alarmed. The sword flash was clearly not fast, but Wu Ming had the feeling that he could not dodge it. Squelch! With a squelch, half of Wu Ming's arm was chopped off, and blood gushed out. However, Wu Ming only frowned. Without saying a word, he raised his other arm and punched behind him. Boom! Along with the golden light, the fist collided with the dark and gloomy 1-meter-tall skull shield. The powerful force caused the atmosphere to tremble. At this moment, a Bont also reacted. This was its body, and it did not even know that someone had snuck in. This was a great humiliation. In an instant, countless branch-like tentacles pierced towards the place where Wu Ming had attacked like sharp swords. Whoosh! The sword flashed, and Abant's branch-like tentacles were shattered one by one as if they were dead. At this moment, the Skywings in their rooms were also awakened by the battle between Wuming, Abant, and the enemy. In their respective rooms, they suddenly opened their eyes. The golden pupils of the sword and the shield instantly turned into scarlet pupils of the sword talisman. Like ghosts, the Skywings collectively passed through the illusory walls of their rooms and headed in Wuming's direction. Because of the Skywings' ability to pass through walls, the walls were just a layer of colored air to them. "Everyone stop!" Wuming yelled at the air. Wuming knew very well who the other party was. Apart from the first Hassan, Wuming could not think of anyone else who could be the Crown Assassin's spirit base. Thus, the other party could not be dealt with by relying on numbers. Even if this number was supplemented by the Skywings, it would not be enough. Wuming's order caused the Skywings, who had been rushing toward Wuming, to collectively stop. Some of the Skywings had even entered Wuming's room. "Return to your rooms and wait for further orders," Wuming said as he gave his second order. Whether it was the Skywings who had already reached Wuming's room or the other Skywings who had not made it in time, they collectively bowed and left with their heads lowered. The Skywings retreated to their rooms, but they continued to stare at Wuming's room with their scarlet eyes. Although Silent Wonder was very dissatisfied that the Skywings were berserkers, he had to admit that there was a benefit to berserker servants, and that was that they were exceptionally obedient. When Wuming said, "Everyone, stop," it naturally included Ab and Haim, so Abent did not attack again. "First Hassan, you and I have nothing to do with each other, so why are you trying to assassinate me?" Wuming said in an unfriendly tone as he looked at the shadow where Wuming had attacked. The entire room was enveloped by the light from the large screen, and only the corner behind Wuming was dark. "Do you have to be so obvious? Did you have to be so obvious?" The reason it was a shadow was because Wuming still could not see who the other party was. However, other than the mysterious first Hassan, who had such powerful stealth abilities and strength that could injure Wuming, Wuming could not think of anyone else. It was as if he had given up because he had not killed the enemy in one strike, or perhaps he had achieved his goal. The shadow in the corner dissipated, revealing a tall figure. He was over 2 meters tall and wore shabby dark armor. The armor's shoulders, elbows, knees, and even back had decorative barbs that pointed upward. He held a simple and worn-out greatsword in his right hand, and his left hand held a meter-tall shield that also had barbs. Most importantly, the other party's armor had a rather shabby cloak and a skull mask. If it was a mask, it would not be too accurate, because the other party's skull mask was more like a helmet than a mask. A skull with strange horns wrapped tightly around the other party's head. Although the area near the chin was not covered by the skull, what was revealed was darkness. Only the area around the eyes had a dark blue flame that looked like a soul fire burning dimly. With this skull face alone, Wuming was sure that the other party was indeed first Hassan, and it was definitely the first Hassan. Crack, crack, crack. With a little cracking sound, the shield held by the first Hassan cracked and then shattered. The fragments turned into a black mist and entangled into the dark cloak behind the first Hassan. The first Hassan, who lost the shield in his left hand, chose to touch the tip of the greatsword to the ground and press the hilt of the greatsword with both hands as if he was leaning on a crutch. "Answer my question, first Hassan," Wuming repeated in a more unfriendly tone. Wuming was indeed easy to talk to, but this did not mean that Wuming would tolerate being cut by someone and losing an arm. Moreover, Wuming was not afraid of the crown's servant. He had 12 incarnations. If Wuming wanted, he could make the first Hassan leave here. "The bell of thy evening has not rung, but thy destiny has deviated." An old and deep voice came from under the mask of the first Hassan. Wuming was dumbfounded. What is this? The bell of the evening did not ring. It should be saying that he should not die yet. Wuming felt like he was scolding himself, but it was the truth. Then why did you come to cut me? According to Wuming's knowledge, the first Hassan was the one who beheaded Hassan who had gone astray. Although it did not mean that the first Hassan would only attack Hassan, Wuming did not understand why the other party attacked him. The two had no interest disputes at all, and Wuming also saved the life of a Hassan. Could it be that the other party was here to thank him? However, this thank you gift was really too heavy, wasn't it? Also, what does deviated destiny mean? Is it possible that there is something that needs me to do, but I didn't do it? Even if it was a reminder, Why did you have to cut me directly? The first Hassan had the ability to kill the opponent instantly. Wu Ming could also feel the power of instant death from the cut, but the cut on Wu Ming did not trigger the instant death effect at all. Wu Ming's body was 100% immune to such means, but this spiritual base was not immune. In other words, the first Hassan did not want to kill him at all? The destiny of the winged otherworlder and the behemoth floating in the mortal world is different. I want to silence it on behalf of God. The first Hassan spoke again. Wu Ming frowned. Is it because the skywing species and Abanti are not native residents of this world, so they were targeted by the first Hassan, and I was only forced to take a cut? Chapter 719. The skywings and Abanti Heim were not products of this planet, which meant that they were actually stowaways. As the thugs of the restraining power, the crown servants were there to deal with these stowaways. However, with the relationship between Wu Ming and the restraining power, how could the restraining power attack Wu Ming? Furthermore, the first Hassan had aimed at Wu Ming, so Wu Ming did not understand what was going on. However, after hearing the first Hassan's next words, Wu Ming understood. However, the blade has already been unsheathed. There is no second strike. To put it simply, the first Hassan had let go of the sky wings and Abanti Heim. So in other words, Wu Ming had taken the punishment on behalf of the sky wings and Abanti. Wu Ming, who had figured it out, sighed, and the anger in his heart dissipated. Now, the world was in a state of burning humanity, and the restraining power Alea was definitely not in a good state. The first Hassan might have been sent out to help Chaldea save humanity. The first Hassan's mission was to find out about the abnormalities, and the skywings and Abanti, as stowaways, were definitely one of the abnormalities, which was the so-called violation of destiny. Destiny was an established fact. Originally, there were no such conspicuous existences like Abanti and the skywings in history, so this was considered a violation of destiny. Take the Lionheart King, who was currently in the Holy City, as an example. She had replaced the Lionheart King to rule the Holy City, which was considered a change of fate, and could also be considered as taking over the Lionheart King's destiny. Since Wu Ming's side was considered to have gone against the will of the heavens, then wouldn't Ramses II's side also be considered to have gone against the will of the heavens? That was very likely. Wu Ming recalled some details about Ramses II. When Ramses II and Wu Ming were talking, Ramses II had been holding his head, and his neck gave Wu Ming a feeling that something was wrong. He did not think much of it at first, but now that he thought about it, Wu Ming felt that something was wrong. Could it be that Ramses II had already been beheaded by the first Hassan, and it was even his head? After seeing the first Hassan's stealth and assassination ability, Wu Ming had no doubt that he could successfully infiltrate Ramses II's temple. The reason why Ramses II was not dead was probably due to the temple's blessing. The lunar residence, in that world, Wu Ming was Wu Ming's temple. Although the size of the temple wasn't large, Wu Ming couldn't be killed if he was inside the temple, just like how Ramses II couldn't be killed in his own temple. With this series of speculations, Wu Ming was now more and more suspicious of Ramses II, wondering if he had also been beheaded by the first Hassan. Ramses II did not die because of the temple. But why was Wu Ming fine after being beheaded by the first Hassan without the temple? Wu Ming's doubts were almost solved. It stood to reason that Wu Ming's spiritual base did not have the instant immunity effect of his root of origin. Even if his arm was cut off, from the point of instant death, he would die as long as he touched it. Therefore, Wu Ming should have left by now. But Wu Ming was fine. Wu Ming looked at his severed arm. The severed arm had turned into magic power and dissipated, and the wound on Wu Ming's severed arm had stopped bleeding, but that was not the point. The point was that Wu Ming did not feel any aura of death on his severed arm. Wu Ming could even use magic power to condense a new arm. Let's do it. Wu Ming thought so, and magic power surged at the severed arm. In just a few seconds, a new arm reappeared. Sure enough. Looking at his newly grown arm, Wu Ming looked at the first Hassan, who was surrounded by shadows. Is it the decision of the restraining power or your own will? Wu Ming looked at the first Hassan. Wu Ming's question was very simple. Did the restraining power give the order to be merciful, or did the first Hassan choose not to let Wu Ming leave? This is the instruction of the evening bell, and also my will. The instruction of the evening bell was definitely the restraining power. That was the difference. Ramses II's head was cut off. Thinking about it, the first Hassan did not use the instant death power when he attacked Ramses II. There were many ways to make a servant leave, such as lack of magic power, master leaving, shattering the heart, spirit core, and head, and so on. Generally speaking, as long as the servant's head was gone, even if the spirit core was intact, they would leave unless they had special abilities. This was the case for Ramses II. The great shrine of Ramses II allowed him to survive after his head was cut off and did not leave. However, this was also thanks to the first Hassan not using the instant death power, which allowed Ramses II to have the opportunity to use the great shrine to extend his life. The first Hassan, who believed in the saying, "Once the sword is out of the scabbard, there is no second sword," did not attack Ramses II again. On the other hand, Wu Ming remembered clearly that the first Hassan's attack was on his body. Because Wu Ming dodged, it led to Wu Ming's arm being cut off. Although cutting off the body was not much better than cutting off the head, one must know that compared to other parts of the body, it was the most difficult place to cut off. After all, the connection point between the arm, head, and other parts of the body was very small, so the first Hassan was actually just cutting off the head. He actually did not expect that Wu Ming could detect his attack and avoid it. Worthy of the name of the legendary dragon. The first Hassan thought so in his heart. On the other hand, Wu Ming was thinking, "Sure enough, it's good to have someone above you." Wu Ming silently nodded in his heart. "In that case, I won't hold you responsible for trying to assassinate me, first Hassan," Wu Ming calmly said. Wu Ming had gotten the upper hand this time. The first Hassan definitely had not snuck in here for a while. If he had attacked Abant and the Sky Wings while Wu Ming was looking for Ramses II, they felt that there was no chance of survival and would have left. According to what the first Hassan had said, it was the first Hassan who had chosen to wait for Wu Ming to arrive before stabbing Wu Ming and letting go of the Sky Wings and Abant. Thinking about it this way, Wu Ming seemed to have to thank the first Hassan. This was too awkward. Even if the first Hassan had given Wu Ming face and only cut him once, having to say thank you after being cut was not something Wu Ming could do. As if seeing Wu Ming's concerns, the first Hassan directly spoke. "I will remember in my heart that thou hast saved Smoky Drunk Hassan." Ah! Wu Ming was stunned. This was really a thank you gift. Although this thank you gift was a little too much for Wu Ming to accept. "I have one more thing," the first Hassan suddenly said. Chapter 720. The silver arm can't save the white man. You still need to save him. Wu Ming was taken aback, then frowned. White man? Silver arm? There was no doubt that these two were referring to two different people. As for the pure white man, Wu Ming could still guess who it was. It was the pure white Lion King who now occupied the holy city, Artoria Pendragon. It wasn't Wu Ming who thought so. Ramses II also called the Lion King Artoria, who was currently in the holy city that way. But who was the silver arm? Wu Ming didn't remember the silver arm among the people he knew, or was it someone Artoria knew? The people related to Artoria were only those, the Knights of the Round Table, Merlin, Morgan Le Fay, and so on. But Wu Ming, as the person who accompanied Artoria for most of her life, was naturally familiar with the people Artoria was familiar with. But none of these people were related to the silver arm. Silver arm. Arm. Wait. Wu Ming suddenly thought of something. From the information obtained by Wu Ming so far, only 3 Knights of the Round Table did not respond to Artoria's summon. Villo their Ransword, Galahad, and Bedivere. Villo was Wu Ming himself, so it was normal that he couldn't be summoned. Galahad was attached to Matthew, so naturally, he couldn't respond to the summon. Bedivere, who was quite loyal to Artoria, also didn't respond to Artoria's summon, which was undoubtedly a big doubt. And Bedivere had a big characteristic as a Knight of the Round Table. He had a broken arm. Among the Knights of the Round Table, only Bedivere had a relationship with the arm. And when he was in the Uruk Singularity, Wu Ming once talked with Merlin. Through the conversation, Wu Ming learned that Merlin was actually very clear about the 6th singularity where Wu Ming was now. After all, he had clairvoyance. And the fact that Artoria was in this singularity was revealed by Merlin. Otherwise, Wu Ming wouldn't know that Artoria was here. Still through the conversation, Wu Ming vaguely learned from Merlin that Merlin was not doing nothing. He had foreshadowed something. As for what the foreshadowing was, unfortunately, Merlin either changed the topic or shook his head mysteriously and refused to say it. Maybe Bedivere was that foreshadowing. But what the truth was, he still had to wait until the truth came out. After ending his inner thoughts, Wu Ming looked at the first Hassan, who was standing in the same place and leaning on his great sword like a crutch. The first Hassan came to tell me all this. I will remember it in my heart. I will consider going to the holy city again. Wu Ming didn't give up the idea of going to the holy city to stop Artoria. Because of the oath, Wu Ming chose to temporarily leave the holy city and go to the desert to seize the Holy Grail. Fortunately, he met Gadotsi and her party on the way. As a result, his goal of helping Gadotsi repair the singularity as soon as possible was half completed. One was to find Gadotsi, and the other was to complete the goal. The former had been completed, and the latter was almost done. After all, Wu Ming had already taken the Holy Grail back. After Gadotsi accompanied Matthew to solve Galahad's wish, Wu Ming would give the Holy Grail to Chaldea and begin to repair the singularity. But after knowing that Artoria seemed to be hiding something from Wu Ming, coupled with the fact that the first Hassan personally came to remind him, Wu Ming decided to stay in the singularity for a while. Don't say too much. This is my thanks, the first Hassan responded to Wu Ming in a brief and simple tone, as if saying goodbye. Then, accompanied by a black fog, the first Hassan disappeared. At the same time, the dark and gloomy feeling in the room also disappeared. The eyes of every skywing species in their room also changed from scarlet eyes of sword runes to golden eyes of sword and shield. All the skywing species calmed down. Abent, who used the entire floating tree as his body, also relaxed. Wu Ming could clearly feel that Abent's magic power had stabilized a lot. As expected of the Hassan of the Hassans, the assassin of the assassins, with the existence of the crown's spiritual base, Wu Ming could not help but exclaim. To be honest, just this aura that even Wu Ming could not detect was enough to show how powerful the first Hassan was. However, if Ramses II were to see this scene, he would probably change his opinion of Wu Ming. Look at Wu Ming. He could even vaguely detect the crown assassin and was able to dodge the opponent's attack. Although he did not dodge, at least he moved. Unlike him, he did not even know that his head had been chopped off. If not for the first Hassan showing himself at the end, Ramses II probably would not have known who had attacked him. If not for the fact that Wu Ming had met Ramses II and had a little understanding of him, Wu Ming might have attributed Ramses II's obedience to fear after being cut by the first Hassan. However, it was precisely because Wu Ming had met Ramses II and understood his character that he did not think so. How could a guy like Gilgamesh know how to write the word fear? This king-like courage was what Wu Ming appreciated. Just as Wu Ming was thinking about whether to immediately go to the holy city, the first Hassan's voice suddenly came from the void. I have cut off thy foreign heir, and the armor of refutation shall return. This was undoubtedly the divine ability of the first Hassan. Having seen it before, Wu Ming was not frightened and instead nodded in understanding. Instead, it was the skywing species and Abant who were startled by the sudden turn of events from the first Hassan and collectively entered battle mode. This made them smile helplessly and gratifyingly. They were indeed no match for the first Hassan, but for the safety of their master, they would still stand up. The loyalty of the skywing species was vividly displayed. Previously, when Wu Ming's arm was cut off by the first Hassan, almost all the skywings woke up from their standby slumber and rushed toward Wu Ming. The reason it was because Jillian did not come. Logically speaking, although Jillian would definitely be the first to come in such a situation, there was no sign of Jillian this time. In truth, it was mainly because Jillian was still in a deep slumber and recovering from the previous incident. It was similar to a protective device in a human body. Jillian was severely lacking in magic power and was recovering, so she might not be able to wake up even if she wanted to. It was the same principle as how humans would fall into a coma after losing large amounts of blood. Not bothering with Jillian, Wu Ming walked out of the room. Now that all the skywings were awake, he had to go and comfort them so they could sleep. Otherwise, even if they were in a non-combat state, Wu Ming was afraid that their berserk state would devour their rationality. However, when he thought about the number of skywings, Wu Ming felt his stomach ache. I'll just treat it as training. Chapter 721. The skywings had fallen asleep, but it was not Wu Ming who pacified them one by one. After all, this was Abanthi's body, and with Abanthi's help, Wu Ming had successfully experienced what it was like to be a leader. Abanthi sent a collective message to the Sky Wings to pacify them. However, this time, the Sky Wings were more like sleep than standby. Because it was Wu Ming who had personally gone to comfort the Sky Wings, he had asked them to lie down on the bed like ordinary girls instead of floating in the air and waiting for an opportunity. Although the Sky Wings did not quite understand this behavior, it was still an order from their master, so they still obeyed. Lying on the bed, the Sky Wings entered a standby state, but to an outsider, they really did look like they were asleep. Back in the monitoring room, Wu Ming sat on the sofa and browsed through a large magic screen in front of him. The screen displayed the basic data of the Sky Wings. Although Abanthi did not really have modern technological knowledge, its magical knowledge was pretty good. Thus, it displayed the basic data of the Sky Wings in the form of a magic screen to Wu Ming. Although as the master of these tens of thousands of Sky Wings, Wu Ming could see the information of their servants, Wu Ming could not look at every Sky Wing one by one. With the idea of slacking off, when the Sky Wings were summoned, Wu Ming only looked at their ranks. The information that Abanthi had prepared for Wu Ming was a great help to Wu Ming. Because the information of ordinary Skywing race servants was the same, Abant collected the information of those Skywing race servants into a sample and took it out. Unless it was a Skywing with a special skill, the information would not be listed separately. Thus, the screen in front of Wu Ming only had the information of a few servants. After browsing for some time, Wu Ming turned off the virtual screen in front of him and leaned back on the sofa. He crossed one hand and rubbed his forehead with the other. Sure enough, Berserker's spirit base has too much of an effect on the Sky Wings. According to the information provided by Abanthi, the Sky Wings summoned by Berserker had an EX Berserker rank. What did an EX Berserker mean? Either they were crazy to the extreme and could communicate with others, or they could not communicate at all, not even with their master. One was the extreme of the positive side, and the other was the extreme of the negative side. It was clear that the Sky Wings had the extreme of the negative side. To put it simply, if the battle went on for a little longer, the Sky Wings might not be able to control themselves, just like Gopril. There was even a high chance that they would break from their master's control, which meant that they might break free from Wu Ming's control or not listen to him. As a result, the Sky Wing species became expendable, because once they were used, they would lose control. This was something Wu Ming didn't want to see. Fortunately, Azrael was different from the other Sky Wings. As the commander of the Sky Wings, Azrael had the ability to resist Berserk. Thus, Wu Ming did not have to worry that Azrael would go Berserk over at Godatsu's place. However, the other Sky Wings were not so lucky. According to the information provided by the servants, the Sky Wings that had gone Berserk were of little value. In that case, the Sky Wings can't move freely, Wu Ming muttered to himself. However, as the original individual, Azrael, and the foreign individual, Gopril, could still move. Azrael had a special skill, which allowed her to move freely. As for Gopril, Wu Ming decided that once she woke up, he would have her follow him. With Wu Ming by his side, Wu Ming did not feel that Gopril would go out of control. Wu Ming could stop Gopril the moment he saw her lose her rationality. In the worst-case scenario, he could use Annihilation Lock to restrain her again. The reason why he did not bring the other Sky Wings was that Gopril also had a special skill. As the strongest foreign individual, Gopril had a skill that greatly strengthened her damage. In other words, Gopril's Sky Strike was much stronger than the other Sky Strikes of the other Sky Wings in terms of explosion range, power, and release speed. In fact, because of the skill, Gopril's mana consumption was much lower than the other Sky Wings. Facing an existence like Gopril, Wu Ming had no reason not to bring her along. This reason also explained why Wu Ming had chosen to have Gopril follow him. It was not because she was a foreign individual and had special privileges, but because she had a special skill. Because she was a foreign individual, she was powerful. And because she was powerful, her character was also extraordinary. It was precisely because of her extraordinary character that she had a special skill that was different from the other Sky Wings. Servants were the clones of heroic spirits, and heroic spirits were a kind of spiritual existence that was a combination of the human spirit and historical legends. This meant that the abilities of heroic spirits did not only rely on their own abilities, but also their inheritance. For example, take a servant that Wu Ming had once met, the Assyrian Empress Semiramis. The noble phantasm she used in Tuliphas was the Hanging Garden of Babylon, a noble phantasm that was sublimated from the essence of the Hanging Garden, a miracle building that had disappeared. The Hanging Garden of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world, was not actually created by Semiramis. Its actual creator was actually Nebuchadnezzar II. It was precisely because of this that it was called the Hanging Garden of Babylon. It could be said that the Hanging Garden of Babylon had nothing to do with her, but because it was rumored in later generations that she had created the Hanging Garden of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Hanging Garden of Babylon, was combined with Semiramis. The Vain Garden of Babylon, Hanging Garden of Babylon, a noble artifact, came into being. The Sky Wings had not died, were not humans, and had no connection with the human spirit, but they had legends. Just like how Wu Ming had left behind legends in history and obtained a different identity as a servant, the Sky Wings also had stories in other worlds. Since they had stories, they naturally had the possibility of becoming heroic spirits. And Wu Ming had cheated by summoning the Sky Wings, so some of their skills or noble artifacts would naturally change because of what they had done in their own world. Azrael and Gopril were examples. Since that's the case, I'll just use the other Sky Wings as my trump cards. After that, Wu Ming put down the hand that was rubbing his eyebrows and opened his eyes. Immediately after, Wu Ming casually waved his hand, and golden ripples spread out around Wu Ming. A silver-white chain with a dark purple aura extended out of the golden ripples. Chapter 722. This was the chain that Wu Ming had used to subdue the berserk Gopril. Its name was Annihilation Lock. Wu Ming looked at the chain that resembled a heaven lock but was no longer a heaven lock. His heart was filled with all sorts of emotions. Wu Ming stroked the Annihilation Lock, and the Annihilation Lock seemed to have a mind of its own. Because of Wu Ming's touch, it flickered with a faint purple light. I didn't expect you to turn a fake into a real noble artifact. That's right. The Annihilation Lock in Wu Ming's hand had already become a noble artifact. It was not wrong to call it a noble artifact. Wu Ming had added his own authority to the chain. Although it was a weakened authority, the authority of a god was still not to be underestimated. When Wu Ming sent Gopril back, he discovered that the pseudo-heaven lock, which had absorbed one of Wu Ming's weakened authority, had been upgraded to the Annihilation Lock, which was a noble artifact. The Annihilation Lock was no longer a fake that would dissipate due to the evaporation of magic power. Instead, it had become a genuine noble artifact that would not wear out even after 1,000 years. The danger of this singularity is beyond my expectations, Wu Ming said calmly. To find help, Wu Ming had used his dependent incarnation. As there was no effective way to subdue Gopril, Wu Ming had deposited the authority of the Annihilation incarnation into the pseudo-heaven lock, so that the chain that he had casually created could bind the berserk Gopril. And just now, Wu Ming had also used his giant incarnation. As for when he used it, it was when Wu Ming had punched the first Hassan. At that time, Wu Ming defined the first Hassan as an enemy, and an enemy who had cut off one of his arms. Wu Ming did not dare to be careless. Therefore, Wu Ming directly used giant incarnation, gathered the power of giant into his fist, and punched at first Hassan. However, Wu Ming was surprised that first Hassan's shield was able to block his attack. As expected of a crowned servant. Even though the assassin class was generally considered the weakest among the 7 classes, the assassin class was not inferior to the saber class, which was generally considered to be the best class. The other saber servants were slightly inferior to the first Hassan. However, Wu Ming was not weak either. The giant incarnation's attack directly shattered the first Hassan's shield. That was the weapon of a crowned servant, and it was not something that could be broken by just anyone. Just like the first Hassan's simple and unadorned great sword that looked a little damaged and had become unsharp, and the cloak behind the first Hassan that looked like a ragged cloth. Both of them were not as weak as they looked on the surface. The great sword that was constantly infused with the faith of the first Hassan had reached a level where it was undamaged, and it even had an instant death effect. The broken cloak was also quite powerful. Not only could it set off a sandstorm that was enough to cover the sun, but it also had a powerful defensive ability that was not weaker than the first Hassan's shield. Therefore, Wu Ming was able to break the first Hassan's shield. After all, in Wu Ming's opinion, the body of a servant was still too weak, unless he could also have a crowned spiritual base. However, the crowned spiritual base was created by suppression. Wu Ming did not need to submit to someone who was destined to be weaker than him, even if the other party was good to him. Anyway, when Wu Ming found his body, Wu Ming did not need to be a yes man anymore. If everything went well, maybe after solving the singularity, Wuming could find his body before Gudatsi and others went to Uruk. Then, he could directly solve the singularity of the Uruk and kill Gitia. He had already seen Gitia's means, and he also forced the other party to detonate the black mud on the outer layer of each world to choose to severely injure Wuming. Gitia must have also been injured, otherwise, he would not let Wuming mess around in this singularity. Gitia, who also saw Wuming's power, was really vigilant against Wuming. Since Wuming had already done so many things in the singularity, and no one stopped him, it was obvious that Gitia did not pay attention to the singularity. In Gitia's view, even with the help of Wuming, Chaldea could repair these burned residues, and it would have no impact on the result. To be more ruthless, even if the burn of humanity was rewritten, and the burn of humanity was successfully restored by Chaldea, it would have no impact on Gitia. The reason was very clear to Wuming, because Gitia's vision, or ambition, was no longer here. Gitia, who had come into contact with the black mud, had long changed his target to other worlds, a wider sea of stars. Although Wuming did not know what Gitia's original purpose was, Wuming knew that Gitia's purpose had changed from the original goal to going to other worlds. This was like a person's original plan was to take a rocket to the moon that was suitable for him, but before taking off, he found a more habitable planet, Mars. Then, using the existing fuel, changing the route, and going to Mars wasn't impossible, right? As for the residues of the fuel, at this point, that kind of thing was no longer necessary for that person to pay attention to. But for Gitia, Wuming, this bomb, still needed to be paid attention to. And for Wuming, this hidden danger, Gitia, also needed to be paid attention to. Although Wuming was confident that the next time he fought with Gitia, Gitia might also have the same confidence. After all, both sides understood each other after fighting once, so Gitia might also have a way to deal with Wuming. But that was all in the future. From the current situation, Wuming and Gitia wouldn't meet for a while, and Wuming didn't have to worry about Gitia coming out to cause trouble. Closing his eyes, Wuming went deep into his inner world. A huge stone plate appeared in Wuming's heart. There were 12 small stone plates on the large stone plate. The small stone plates were placed in the 12 o'clock direction like a scale, and 3 small stone plates were in a completely dim, petrified grayish-white state. They were the giant incarnation at 2 o'clock, the annihilation incarnation at 5 o'clock, and the dependent incarnation at 8 o'clock. These 3 incarnations had been used by Wuming, and Wuming could only use the remaining 9 incarnations. But Wuming didn't regret it. After all, good steel should be used on the blade. After that, Wuming left the inner world and opened his eyes. The next thing he needed to think about was Artoria. Chapter 723. Whether it was from Ramses II or the first Hassan, Wuming learned one thing. That was, Artoria's change was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. There must be more to it than meets the eye. And according to the first Hassan's words of, "I need thy rescue," Artoria's current state was not good. Although Wuming seemed to have a conflict with Artoria, Wuming could not sit still once something related to Artoria appeared. The feelings that he had gained from being with her for most of his life were not something that could be abandoned just because of a quarrel. If anyone thought that this feeling could be easily abandoned, then they had underestimated the bond between Wuming and Artoria. If I have a conflict with her and bully her until she cries, that's fine. But if you bully her until she cries, then I'm sorry, but you're done for. You'll die a horrible death, the kind that doesn't even leave behind a trace. Artoria was that she, and Wuming was that I. When it came to Artoria, Wuming would never give in, not even half a step. Wuming estimated that this matter might not have much to do with the Magus King, but the singularity was indeed caused by the Magus King in the beginning. And Wuming could not find trouble with the Magus King at the moment, so he could only take the right approach. Calculating the time, Tachika and the others should have arrived at the Holy City by now, Wuming thought. He decided to go to the Holy City first to meet up with Gudatsi and the others. But right now, Gopril, who was in a coma, had yet to wake up. Wuming did not dare to let her move freely, and restricting her movements was not appropriate either. So Wuming decided to wait until Gopril woke up. Of course, Wuming could also choose to heal Gopril and take the initiative to wake her up. But because Wuming wanted to punish Gopril, he chose to let her recover on her own. However, things were different now. Wuming had to hurry. With that in mind, Wu Ming stood up from the sofa and walked out of the room. Abent was quite perceptive. He took the initiative to open a door on the wall not far away. If he was not mistaken, that door should be Jillian's room. Thinking so, Wu Ming walked to the front of Gypsy's door and politely knocked on the door. However, how could the unconscious Gopril possibly respond to Wu Ming? Wu Ming knocking on the door was just a mischievous act. After knocking on the door, Wu Ming pushed the door open and entered. His actions were rather smooth, and from this, it could be confirmed that Wu Ming had no intention of entering the room with Gopril's permission. Sometimes pleasure or bad taste was just that simple. Wu Ming subconsciously looked around when he entered Gopril's room. A room that looked no different from the other Sky Wings entered Wu Ming's eyes. The plain walls, the plain bed, and the plain table served as a foil to the angelic girl's beauty and purity. Gopril was like a sleeping beauty, quietly lying on her simple and unadorned bed. The girl's wings, which were filled with pure white feathers, extended from her back to her front, gently covering her thighs and abdomen like a quilt. The girl's eyes were closed, and her beautiful face was exposed to the air. The girl's hands were crossed and placed above her abdomen and below her chest. Her chest rose and fell as if she was having a sweet dream. Wu Ming, who was immersed in the picture of Sleeping Beauty, sighed. Afterward, Wu Ming walked over to the bed and sat down. She's clearly in the posture of a slender girl, so why is she a combat weapon? Could it be that Artemis has some sort of special fetish? Wu Ming jokingly muttered to himself. Looking at her slender body, no one would have imagined that such a girl could erupt with destructive power. She's beautiful on the outside. If only the hearts of Sky Wings could be as beautiful as a girl's. Wu Ming sighed. Beautiful things had a beautiful interior, and this was something that every normal person yearned for. However, the hearts of Sky Wing girls were not as beautiful as they looked. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were bloodthirsty. They were combat weapons, and they were weapons that were originally created with the goal of killing gods. Moreover, for some reason, Sky Wing girls had an interest in collecting heads. This meant that Sky Wing girls were not suited for human life. It was a good thing that Wu Ming did not require them to completely integrate into human life. Not being able to fight at will was akin to hell for them. Wu Ming understood the principle that one's temperament had to be changed bit by bit. When things reached an extreme, they could only move in the opposite direction. It was precisely because of this that Wu Ming had summoned the Sky Wing girls to help at this particular point. Although he did not know how much time had passed in their world, they must be feeling rather uncomfortable because they could not fight as they wished. In that case, he would let them release some pressure. Not only that, but their arrival could also help Wu Ming. This was a plan that could kill two birds with one stone. It was a sure win. However, who would have thought that these Sky Wings would be summoned as berserkers? Their adaptability to the berserker class allowed the Sky Wing girls to reach the highest level of berserk. Moreover, because it was not a normal summon, this level of berserk gave them a chance to break away from their master's orders. The plan to let the Sky Wings release the pressure in their hearts had failed because the Sky Wings were too prone to losing their minds in their current state. The plan to let the Sky Wings help also failed because the Sky Wings, who were prone to losing their minds, had no way of helping Wu Ming. Wu Ming even wondered if he had hidden his luck. This was simply a case of misfortune never coming singly. Wait a minute. Wu Ming looked at Gopril's beautiful face and suddenly realized something. If I use Vitality Incarnation, can I suppress Gopril's berserk? Yes. Wu Ming suddenly thought of his own authority. Since Wu Ming's origin dragon became stronger after the baptism of origin, Wu Ming hardly used Vitality Incarnation. The only time he used it recently was to restore the life of No Name. The reason why he did not use this incarnation was very simple. It was just too useless. Vitality Incarnation could provide Wu Ming with spring-like vitality. Not only could it recover injuries and mana, but it could also resist negative effects such as curses. However, after going through the origin baptism, Silent Dragon's recovery ability wasn't weak. Injuries and mana could be recovered quickly, and the origin dragon's body was also immune to negative effects. Therefore, Wu Ming basically did not use Vitality Incarnation. So, since Wu Ming could not use it, could this incarnation work on a servant who had fallen into berserk? Chapter 724. Although berserk could increase ability value, Berserk also had a negative effect on the servant. So, if he injected Vitality Incarnation into Jillian's body, would she be able to avoid the negative effects of Berserk? Of course, Wu Ming did not expect Jillian to enjoy the ability value increase from Berserk after she successfully maintained her rationality, as long as her rationality was no longer affected by Berserk. Wu Ming originally wanted to let the primitive Sky Wings help him, and he did not want to increase their ability value by much. After all, the price of increasing ability value was losing rationality, so it was better not to increase it. With that in mind, Wu Ming grabbed Jillian's soft body and closed his eyes. Wu Ming began to try to give the authority of Vitality Incarnation to Jillian. After all, Wu Ming had never tried to give authority to a servant. The situation when Wu Ming used Dependent Incarnation, Annihilation Incarnation, and Giant Incarnation was completely different from the current situation. When Wu Ming used the Dependent Incarnation, he used the power of the Dependent as a medium like a holy relic into the summoning circle. When Wu Ming used the Annihilation Incarnation, he added the power of Annihilation into the process of creating the pseudo-heavenly lock. When he used the Giant's power, he simply used it. Now, Wu Ming needed to instill the authority of Vitality Incarnation into Jillian's spirit base in an attempt to change the Berserk effect of Jillian's Berserker class. Wu Ming had experienced using his authority on a servant, but Wu Ming had never experienced using authority on a servant. Because he did not have any experience, Wu Ming could only fumble around on his own. Specks of phosphorescent magic power danced around Wu Ming's body, and the magic power seemed to have a life of its own as it surrounded Jillian. Then, Wu Ming began to chant. The one with the supreme divine power of the guardian, the protection of the god, the abomination of the devil, nothing can get close to her, surging like a fountain of vitality. As she chanted, the surrounding phosphorescent light shone brightly. The originally star-like mana turned into a mass of mana, dancing around Jillian. That was Wu Ming's authority, the embodiment of Wu Ming's vitality. Grant the world equal protection. The moment the last sentence was chanted, the mana sphere representing Wu Ming's Vitality Incarnation instantly fused with Gopril's body. A faint radiance was emitted from Jillian's body, and Wu Ming, who was holding Jillian's hand, could clearly feel that Jillian's mana was rapidly recovering. This meant that success. There was no surprise, no joy, as if it was a matter of course. Wu Ming said indifferently. No matter what, it was still Wu Ming's own authority. If he couldn't control it himself, then who could he count on? For Wu Ming, it was unexpected but reasonable. Along with the rapid recovery of her mana, Jillian, who was lying on the bed, slowly opened her eyes. Jillian spoke subconsciously, somewhat puzzled. Although Jillian gave off a sleepy feeling, Wu Ming knew that this was the after-effect of Jillian's madness. How do you feel, Jillian? Wu Ming asked with concern. Master. Jillian, who heard Wu Ming's words, was obviously shocked. After coming back to her senses, Jillian saw Wu Ming holding her hand and looking at her with a face full of concern. She responded shyly to Wu Ming. Oh, Master is really concerned about me. Could it be that Master wants to do something perverted to me if it's Master sure? Jillian's answer instantly made Wu Ming raise his brows. Then, Wu Ming silently raised his fist. Bang! After a short while, Wu Ming sat on Jillian's bed with his legs crossed, while Jillian stood in front of Wu Ming with a smile on her face. It seemed that there was no problem at all. Of course, that was if one ignored the bump on Jillian's head. How do you feel, Jillian? Wu Ming crossed his arms and repeated his previous question. Jillian, who had learned her lesson, naturally didn't tease Wu Ming anymore. Instead, she began to answer seriously. Yes, although I don't know what happened, my body seems to have endless energy. Jillian wasn't an idiot. Instead, she was quite smart. Naturally, Jillian remembered what had happened before she lost consciousness. Combined with her own Berserk EX, Jillian naturally deduced that she had lost her rationality and went berserk because of that skill. Although Wu Ming didn't say it explicitly, the reason why she could wake up without any discomfort was probably related to her master. You don't have the urge to kill like crazy anymore? Wu Ming asked. Jillian shook her head and said helplessly and playfully. I'm a Skywing, after all. Of course I still want to kill, Wu Ming glared at Jillian, and she immediately became obedient. But the feeling of wanting to kill can be controlled, just like in my original world. Jillian touched the bump on her head with some lingering fear. Her master's beating really hurt. Afterward, Jillian propped up her other arm with one hand, and the arm that was propped up extended a finger to her chin as she spoke again, puzzled. Not only that, I realize that compared to before, I'm calmer, as if the urge has been eliminated, right? Wu Ming answered for Jillian in advance. Yes, that's right. That's it. Not only that, even if I'm angry, I can only feel it a little. My anger seems to have been soothed by something. Gillier sighed. This feeling was a little uncomfortable for her. It was like having a hot-tempered friend, but one day, he suddenly became not hot-tempered, and he became very calm. Not to mention the people who knew him, even he himself was surprised and uncomfortable with his current personality. However, Jillian's answer made Wu Ming close his eyes and nod. It seems that the authority is in effect. Because the effect of vitality incarnation was still active, whenever Jillian had negative emotions such as rage and killing, vitality incarnation would purify them. But after all, it was a weakened version of authority incarnation, and it didn't affect Wu Ming himself, so it might not work completely on Jillian. However, there was one thing that was certain. Jillian would no longer be affected by Berserk. Chapter 725. Wu Ming told Jillian what he had done to Jillian. Then, Jillian knelt down on one knee in shock. Lord Wu Ming, please forgive me for being blunt, but your gift is too precious. After knowing that Wu Ming had bestowed her with God's authority by slaying a god, she immediately became very serious. Although Gopril usually looked very playful, that was just her appearance. Every Sky Wing was serious and bloodthirsty, and Gopril was no exception. Once something serious happened, Gopril would become serious, just like now. Even Gopril's address for Wu Ming changed from Master to Lord Wu Ming, because she became serious. Is that what you think, Gopril? Wu Ming smiled helplessly and shook his head. But I think it's a good deal. A dispensable authority incarnation in exchange for a rational helper. No matter how Wu Ming thought about it, he was the one who profited. Lord Wu Ming, I can feel the power of authority in my body. Gopril looked into Wu Ming's eyes. Even if I've been emitting magic power, the magic power in my body hasn't decreased in the slightest, and it's still full. That was the effect of the authority Wu Ming bestowed on Gopril. Not only that, but I also feel the surging vitality in my body all the time, as if it's about to break out of my body. That was naturally the effect of vitality incarnation. The endless vitality could quickly replenish and heal injuries. Gopril estimated that even if she was seriously injured, she would not need to go to the repair device to recover. In just a few minutes, the serious injury would disappear, and she would recover to her peak strength. Through these visible effects, Gopril also understood how powerful this power was. It was too wasteful to give such power to her. If Wu Ming kept it, it could be used as a trump card. Therefore, this subordinate believes that for such a precious authority, you should keep it instead of giving it to the subordinate. I don't agree with you, Gopril. Wu Ming gave Gopril a negative opinion. It's a real waste not to use the authority because it's precious and you're afraid of wasting it. Wu Ming's words made Gopril stunned, but it was not without reason. Even if something was precious, it had a use. If you chose not to use it because it was precious and kept it for safekeeping, then that item would definitely be shamed. Just like money, no matter how much money you earned, if you didn't use it, you would still be a pile of dirt after you died. To put it simply, Wu Ming was a person who believed in making the best use of everything. He would not use something because it was too precious. Of course, this was not to say that Wu Ming was a fool. Since Wu Ming chose to use it, there would naturally be benefits to be gained. Letting Gopril regain her consciousness was undoubtedly beneficial to Wu Ming's current situation. Compared to Wu Ming not knowing if he could use the vitality incarnation, it was better to give it to Gopril. Having decided to use the other Sky Wings as Joker cards, Wu Ming did not choose to use the vitality incarnation on them and instead used it on Gopril alone. Apart from this, Wu Ming could not guarantee that the vitality incarnation on the Sky Wings would be able to suppress Berserk transformation. Therefore, using it on the strongest Sky Wing life form, Gopril, was the best decision. After all, the saying, quality, not quantity made sense. So, Gopril, if you feel afraid and guilty about having the authority of a god, then do your best to fight for me. What could he do if he felt guilty? He just had to make it seem like he deserved it. The best way was to make military contributions. Wu Ming's words made Gopril's eyes light up. Gopril instantly perked up and replied to Wu Ming with a victorious smile. Yes. The Skywing alien Giliel is determined to sweep away all the enemies in your path for you, my lord. Victory for you. At this moment, Gopril seemed to have found her purpose in that war that had lasted for who knew how long. For my lord's victory, I won't hesitate to die. Get ready, Gopril. We'll go to the holy city in a moment, Wu Ming said and walked toward the door. He did not forget that this was Gopril's room. Yes. Hearing Gopril's response, Wu Ming pushed the door open and went out. After closing the door, Wu Ming let out a long sigh of relief. Gopril is really giving me a headache, Wu Ming said as he walked toward the surveillance room that Abant had opened for him. But it's better to have a headache than to have no one to deal with her. Wu Ming said and walked into the surveillance room. Wu Ming sat on the familiar sofa and looked at the virtual surveillance screen in front of him. Wu Ming shouted to Abant. Abant, can you turn on the surveillance around you? There were no words, only the changes on the virtual screen in front of Wu Ming. The virtual screen no longer showed the skywings, but the barren land and withered branches that had lost all life, as well as the clear sky with a large halo. There was no doubt that Abant was like a moving fortress in the sky, turning on the surveillance of his surroundings. Very good. Then, let's go, Abant. Wu Ming nodded, then raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Pa! In an instant, a huge black-purple ripple appeared in front of Abant Heim. It was Wu Ming's teleportation skill, and on the other side of the teleportation gate was the holy city that Wu Ming had been to before. The black-purple ripple kept wriggling as if it was the gate of hell. This was originally the special effect of the teleportation gate. It did not look like much when it was the height of a person, but after it was played out, it was a little nauseating. Anyway, Wu Ming felt that it was a little strange, so it was better to leave quickly. Let's go, Abant. After Wu Ming said that, Abant moved. Although Wu Ming did not feel any signs of movement, through the surveillance that Abant gave to Wu Ming, he could see that Abant was gradually entering the teleportation gate that Wu Ming had opened. In just a moment, Abant was completely submerged in the black-purple ripple. As if he had received a notification, the black-purple ripple instantly closed. Abant Heim's departure did not leave any trace. The barren land was still the same barren land, and the large halo in the sky was still the same blue sky. Only this singularity was still collapsing. Chapter 726. The pure white city walls stood on the plains, surrounding the last pure land on this land. The current holy city was called Camelot. It was a holy city with chalk walls. It was built on these ruins. A large group of refugees surrounded the gate of the holy city. They looked up at the holy city from time to time. But after a few glances, they quickly lowered their heads, as if they would tarnish the holy city if they looked too much. The refugees knew that this place was originally a religious holy land, the holy city of Jerusalem. Later, it was occupied by the Lionheart King, Charlie I. However, Charlie I was not a wise king. To say that he was a tyrant was an understatement. He was simply a demon. But fortunately, the cruel and heartless Lionheart King was defeated by the new Lion King. Although the Lionheart King was defeated, almost all the people were displaced because of the war. In order to provide shelter for the people, after the Lion King defeated the Lionheart King, the new holy city was built at an extremely fast speed. This made the people who heard the news very excited. But the truth was beyond their expectations. The Lion King did not open the city to accept the refugees. Instead, he closed the city gate and did not allow the refugees to enter at will. Moreover, he also ordered that the holy city would hold a holy selection every once in a while. As long as they passed the holy selection, they could enter the holy city and start a new life. However, the refugees who had suffered a lot did not want to wait any longer. So the first bird came out. Defeating the evil Lionheart King made the Lion King on the side of justice in the eyes of the people. The Lion King was benevolent. This was something that many people believed at that time and even now. However, there were always some people who were not honest. People were divided into good and evil. The good people waited for the holy selection to proceed, while the evil people raised the flag of rebellion. They formed a rebellion army and launched an attack on the holy city. However, how could these so-called rebels be a match for the Lion King who defeated the Lionheart King. In the eyes of outsiders, the rebel army was instantly defeated without any surprise. However, the Lion King forgave them and let them participate in the holy selection. What a benevolent king! These refugees who only knew how to express themselves thought so. However, the problem was that since it was a selection, there must be people who failed. However, this was something that no one noticed. Where did all the people who failed the selection go? The refugees only thought that those people had entered the holy city to live and didn't think too much about it. Even the rebel army, that wanted to rebel against the Lion King, had the qualifications to enter the holy city. How easy was it for this king to be selected? No, it should be said that this Lion King was very benevolent. In this way, the people who had been displaced by the war would naturally rush here spontaneously after hearing the news. More and more refugees rushed over and entered the holy city. The number of refugees in the wilderness dwindled. The newly arrived refugees did not consider whether the sacred city could accommodate such a large number of refugees. Or rather, they were subconsciously deceiving themselves. Everything was for the sake of survival. Although there were many dangers in the wilderness of this era due to the changes in the singularity, there were still many refugees who insisted on coming. As long as there was a glimmer of hope to survive in a safe place, people who yearned for a safe environment would not give up. At this moment, the refugees at the entrance of the holy city were the ones who had just arrived. According to the solemn knight patrolling around the holy city, the frequency of saint selection had increased. Now, there would be a saint selection every few days. This undoubtedly made the refugees very excited. Because they would be safe soon. There would be no more danger and no more harm. According to the solemn knight, a group of refugees had been bewitched by the mountain people in the northern mountains and the emissaries of the new powers in the west. They had escaped the holy city's selection. How foolish! Every refugee who gathered at the entrance of the holy city for the saint selection thought so. Giving up a good life in the holy city and running to live with the mountain people, were they blinded by faith? However, it seemed that one of the leaders of the mountain people had been killed by the holy city's gatekeepers and the guerrilla knights. It could be considered a lesson for those people. However, this had nothing to do with them. Soon, they would be able to enter the holy city and live a happy life. As if responding to the inner thoughts of the refugees, the gates of the holy city opened. Generally speaking, the patrolling knights around the holy city would not enter or leave the holy city. They had their own strongholds around the holy city. In other words, the opening of the holy city's gates meant that the saint selection was about to take place. Immediately after, the sound of steel armor stepping on the ground came from the holy city's gates. Then, the sound of uniform footsteps, exuding a surging aura, entered the ears of the refugees. All the refugees stood up excitedly and looked at the holy city's gatekeeper, Sir Gawain, who was leading the solemn knights to conduct the saint selection. Without the slightest change, the knights of solemnity surrounded the refugees as if they were preparing for a ceremony. Gawain walked into the encirclement of the solemn knights. He was about to begin the saint selection as usual. At this moment, there was a sudden commotion among the refugees. Gawain frowned. Could it be that someone would appear this time to stop the saint selection? Could it be the master of Chaldea, who represents the new power, or is it Hassan again? Gawain shook his head. After the saint selection refugees' escape a few days ago, Gawain had brought enough manpower this time. If he still wanted to save the refugees with just a few servants, it would not be so easy. However, I still have to be wary of that winged guy, Gawain muttered to himself. As the representative of the new power, Chaldea's master was indeed not powerful enough. However, Berserker, who had wings like an angel, made Gawain take it a little seriously. As expected of the holy spear that could withstand the holy spear that the king released when he woke up. The people of that new power are indeed very strong. If it were not for the problem of leaving, Gawain would have been more than happy to go all out and have a good fight with that angel. Gawain shook his head. The most important thing now was to proceed with the saint selection smoothly. Otherwise, he would not be able to explain himself to Gawain. Silence! Gawain shouted, and the restless crowd calmed down. However, they all looked at the sky behind them. Gawain was taken aback, then realized something. The holy city was behind him. Could it be that the enemy had launched an air attack? Gawain turned his head and looked at the sky. What he saw made his pupils shrink. For some reason, A huge purplish-black ripple suddenly appeared high in the sky. However, that was not the main point. The main point was the thing that appeared from the purplish-black ripple. It was a huge floating tree. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.